And we like to tell ourselves like, oh yeah, maybe it's Western influence or whatever, but then when you find yourself in the history again, it's so validating, especially as a people or a group of people who have been told for so long that you don't have a right to exist.
Today we're here with Dane Nakama, who, simply put, is an artist. Does that sound right to you? I feel like it's so vague and you're so much more than an artist, but all I could think about is artist.
I'm going through an existential crisis right now, so even me like describing myself as an artist, I'm like, what does that mean? Yeah, for
Artist?
the sake of, yeah. We
Okay,
can just call it
artist,
that.
Dane Nakama, artist.
Mahjong enthusiast, Mahjong cult leader, yeah.
I'm really curious on how you got interested in art. Was it something you've always done?
I started making my own action figures when I was younger because my favorite TV show when I was really small was Kikaida. Because it was my dad's generation, there weren't any toys available. So out of necessity, I made my own little sculptures out of like paper towel, Scotch tape, and Sharpie marker.
That's so cute.
As far as career-wise, I was specifically told not to go to art school for college by my parents because they're like, you're gonna change your mind, you're gonna realize that you're not gonna wanna do this. And I was like, okay. When I was applying to colleges, I didn't have any prerequisites. I didn't have a letter of rec, I didn't have, well, I had a portfolio, but I just didn't know how to go about it. So I went to a liberal arts college. The professors were actually very encouraging, whereas because I had been studying by myself for so long, they were like, oh, you're actually further ahead in some of the vernacular or history. And so they suggested that I look into a different program. And then I came home and then I sat my parents down. I had this whole presentation ready. I was like, look, it's not just me who thinks that I can do this now. I basically said, you know, I'm gonna try to apply to transfer. And if I don't get all my credits to transfer, it's not gonna be cheaper and it's gonna be a better school, then I won't go. I tried to make it sound impossible, which in theory it kind of was. But then it all happened and then my parents were like, oh, well, bleep. They were like, just like, oh shit, we promised you, you know? And so I think I'm just hard-headed.
Yeah.
I'm really hard-headed. That's the one trait that I got from both my parents.
So,
and, oh, they're gonna watch this.
wait for So I feel like one of the things that draws people to your art is how you are really open about how you connect to your culture and how you find out more about your identity through your art.
When I was younger, I thought that I was part Hawaiian. I was born and raised in Hawaii. Many of my cousins are part Hawaiian, but mainly it's because of my dad. He is an avid surfer, plays the ukulele and slacky guitar, and was also a Hawaiian history teacher for over 30 years. But by blood, I am not Hawaiian. And for this reason, I have shared a complicated relationship to the islands that I call home.
When did that start and how did you get kind of reeled into that? Because I feel like that's a big part of your art now.
I think like when I was really young, I would watch Enka performances with my grandma.
So cute.
And I love it. I was just, those were my bops. And like, I was so into it.
Oh my God.
And then like bon dances were definitely a big part of it. So like, I think the aspect of just knowing that it connected me to so many people so early on was nice. Like I was able to find community so quickly through it. Traditional craft and art and history, for me, connects me both to the past and the future, you know. Whenever we're talking about like contemporary culture, it's always about the future. It's always about like what's new, what's next, you know. But then it's like this weird, like beautiful telephone game where like I simultaneously, when I'm doing something, I'm speaking to something that I know will exist past me because it's existed for so long. In that respect, it's just so funny how me being obsessed with the old has propelled me into like such a new conversation. You
think it's because you're raised here too, like compared to being in Japan? I feel like a lot of the times in local Japanese culture, we try to hold on more compared to being in Japan. You like want to be more modern and hip, and you're not like going to bon dance maybe as much as a local Japanese person, you know. Like,
Definitely.
I don't think my cousins in Japan go to Bon dance, but for me, I'm like, oh my God, it's like summer.
It's here,
yeah, we should
yeah,
go, you know,
yeah.
because that's the only connection like
Yeah.
that I have.
I've struggled with that my whole life because I've always been told that I'm not Japanese. I'm
Right.
Japanese American, or I'm Nikkei, or I'm, you know. And so like, even when I was living in Japan, like repeatedly, they're like, oh, you're not Japanese.
Yeah, especially in Japan,
Especially
right? Like
in
when I'm in
Japan.
Japan, they're like, wow, you're so like Hawaii.
Yeah.
Like if I give someone a hug, they're like, wow, like
Yeah.
American.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
so American.
I just watched a documentary on this artist Nam Jim-pik, and in it they're like, oh, how do you define yourself? And he's like, it depends on where I am. You know, like if I'm in a place where there are no Koreans, then I'm Korean. You know,
yeah.
but if I'm in Korea, then I'm American, and if I'm in America, then I'm Korean again. And then so it's like all contextual.
That's so true.
Yeah.
I feel like that relates exactly to
Yeah,
us,
yeah.
right?
That's a whole video in itself.
I know.
Yeah.
It's like we could like talk about this
Yeah.
forever. This identity crisis, or like they call it border dwellers, I think, too,
I've
right?
never heard that phrase before.
Really? So I was in
Interesting.
communication class, and then that's when I came across that word, and it
Yeah.
was like you're kind of in between these two cultures,
Yeah.
and I really felt that at that time because it's like I worked at a Japanese restaurant. They saw me as the American one, you know, and talking to some of the customers who were like from Japan. Like if
Yeah.
I went Japanese first, they would look at me and
Yeah.
they'd be like, "Why is their Japanese a little off?" You
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah,
But if I
yeah,
go
yeah,
English
yeah.
first
Yeah.
and then speaking like Japanese after, they're like, "Wow, your Japanese
This
is
is
so
so good."
good."
Yeah.
You know, like when did you
Yeah.
move to Hawaii? You know, and then like when I was in college, it's like I was the Japanese one
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
classroom or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
I know I don't present myself to be the most sexual person. I, for the most part, keep that part of myself hidden from many people because it doesn't fit the innocent and nerdy persona that I've heavily curated. My sexuality is a part of who I am. And like many other things I haven't fully yet understood, making art about it has made it somewhat clearer. Slowly, I began to realize that a hidden sexual history does not only pertain to my story, but also relates to my Japanese heritage.
I think one thing that I think is really exciting about nowadays is we're learning about how much of history has been revised, and we're learning about how much of history just has been left out from certain spaces. And so for me, I was honestly really inspired by the Mahu movement of Hawaii. You know, people are educating themselves about the history of what it was to be Mahu, or what it was to be this third gender, and what that meant for the spectrum of sexuality throughout Hawaiian history. And so me kind of reintroducing myself to my own identity and culture, I didn't ever expect it to be in Japanese history, but there is. It's like there's a whole history to queerness, and there was actually a third gender recorded in medieval Japan known as the wakashu. When I was researching that history, I was like, oh wow, like there were people like me, you know, from the beginning. And I think that's fascinating.
Right.
You know?
How'd that feel when you just found all of that too?
When you find yourself in the history again, it's so validating, especially as a people or a group of people who have been told for so long that you don't have a right to exist. Like it's revelatory in many ways.
Did you have any of this conversation while you were studying in Japan?
It's so weird because even when you say like Japan's so hush hush, at the same time they're so like
Out there.
yeah, they're so out there and they're so pent up
and so weird.
And so you know, like
there's no gray areas.
There's no. It's like a really a lot or like none at all. You know, and I think
or
that's
it's like their daytime self and their night self.
Yeah, and like I think understanding that polarity was fascinating.
This boy be in my DM say I'm pretty. This boy be in my DM say I'm pretty.
Moving forward, what are you excited for about your art and just being there? And
Really good question. I mean, going back to my existential crisis, what a time to have an existential crisis as I'm going to grad school. So UCLA, having accepted me, it felt different because I didn't feel like I had gotten in. Because so much of my work has to do with research about being from Hawaii, being Japanese, being Okinawan, you know, all of these super nuanced identities that are in the main conversation of art. It felt like that story got in. And And that was really exciting, you know, like that was like, wow, like they're ready to listen, or they're gonna listen to this. Why I struggle with the term artist a lot, and we use it for lack of a better word, but it's because for me, an artist, the work they make starts and ends in their lifetime. You know, like every Monet was painted in Monet's lifetime. Every Van Gogh was painted in Van Gogh's lifetime. Whereas like a cultural practitioner or a traditional craftsman or an educator, you live on past yourself and past yourself, you know? And so I think for me, I don't know, I've more and more seen art as just a vehicle through which I can start a conversation. And the more conversations that I have and the better I get at conversations, I think it's gonna help me realize what I gotta do, you know? I feel like a lot of the spaces where I make works and people are like, oh, I've never heard someone say that, or like, let's talk about it, or like, that's not at all, you know? Those are like the sweet spots where I'm like, okay, I'm doing something right. I don't know. Both my parents are teachers, and I think like seeing how much they can influence, like, I don't know, like we don't take education as seriously as we should, as far as like we've gotten ourselves into so many predicaments as a society just because of how much we don't know about each other, about the world, about how things are happening, right? I don't think if everyone knew or had the capacity and freedom to learn as much as they want to, we'd be in so many precarious situations. Learning about your identity, learning about the arts, learning about culture, learning about other people's culture, all of these things. You can't say to me that if we didn't learn more about how we're different, we're gonna get along better, you know?
You're gonna be a great teacher, I think.
Thanks, I hope so. I mean,
feel like you're already doing it, like you're already practicing it.
I know I'm Japanese because I can't take compliments very well.
Oh my god,
Yeah,
same,
it's very hard.
same.
I'm just like
I
sitting
just, like,
here
walk
awkwardly
away,
like,
Take it, take it.